What's going on, summoners? Welcome back to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. I'm Kangas, and today I'm giving you the only AD carry guide you will ever need. To get you the best information for this guide, we worked together with one of our challenger analysts, Kirks. So if you're interested in playing AD carry like a challenger level player, make sure to pay close attention. Hit that sub button, and let's get into it. The AD carry role is in charge of the consistent damage throughout the game. Relying primarily on auto attacks to defeat enemy minions, champions, and monsters alike, these champions need to get to specific item breakpoints if they want to carry their games. Some champions are more auto attack focused than others, but all AD carries need to learn to spot windows in which they can auto attack. Also, by the way, this is not limited to AD carries at all. Every character, especially in the early game, should make use of their auto attacks. I've seen a lot of players bring up the argument that they were out of mana in a specific situation, but even out of mana, any champion can deal a little bit of damage with their basic attacks. And this concept is very important in the early stages of the game and the very first skirmishes. Don't forget to auto attack, people. And also a special shout out to the support role. Don't be afraid to adjust your position and just attack the enemy. You won't believe how many times I've witnessed Grandmaster supports not weave in auto attacks in their games, so if you want to be better than them, just give it a shot. Alright, so now into the actual AD carry guide itself. The very first but most important basic mechanic of an AD carry is last hitting. Missing out on a single minion might mess up your recall timing and force you to either stay in base longer or remain in lane for an additional wave. This loss of tempo can cost you dearly. Every second spent in position where you're not acquiring gold and XP is a net loss for yourself. And your role scales the best with gold, as your primary source of damage is basic attacks. We've all seen it happen, and we all know how it feels to do no damage in a fight. So to avoid this as much as possible, please work on your last hitting skills and communicate with your support to not take last hits if possible. Now, this problem is obviously more prominent in the lower brackets, as supports will randomly just throw spells into the minion wave. To avoid this issue and overall for a more relaxed experience, try and look for a duo queue partner to play. Trust me, it is night and day difference when playing solo queue in comparison to duo queue. So while you're going for these last hits, it's very important to spot the enemy and see what they're trying to do as well. As they're also reliant on gold income, you can actually use that information to your advantage. And if you checked out any of our other videos about other lanes, you'll understand that this is important in every lane. Whenever an enemy tries to go for CS, there needs to be a response. You don't want to give the enemy anything for free at any time. I mean, picture this. Every single time the enemy laner attacks a minion, they briefly stun themselves because they can't move for the duration of the attack windup. This very small window can actually be abused to deal a small amount of damage. Just one little trade might not amount to much, but doing this continuously will get you into the best position to stomp your lane. Repeating this process multiple times in a row leaves the enemy with a very low HP pool. Consequently, they're now forced to make a decision whether they want to stay or go back to base, and both decisions carry a certain amount of risk with them. Staying with low HP can get you killed if the enemy is competent enough to dive you, so you might not only lose your life, but also the minions that are running into tower. So you're basically losing twice there. On the other hand, by going back to base, you're guaranteed to at least lose a few minions to the tower. However, you will stay alive and the gold gap between both AD carries won't be as large. So now's a good time for our question of the day. How do you like Riot's idea of launching so many different events? I personally think it's a really cool way to make content more accessible for the free-to-play player base, and I hope that they keep doing it. But what's your take on it? Let me know in the comments down below, and let's hop back into the video. Now, with the previous concept in mind, we can move on to another very important strategy. This idea is super important on the PC version of League of Legends, but it also carries value on the Wild Rift. Getting off something called a cheater recall really helps you accelerate your lead. For those of you who don't know what a cheater recall is, it's basically finding a recall window to buy items without losing any or just a few creeps. Ideally, this means that you stack up a wave and crash it into the tower and then reset. The enemy will be busy dealing with the wave and unable to replenish their own resources, nor are they allowed to spend their gold. You, on the other hand, will come back to lane with 100% HP, mana, and all of your gold spent. Now your goal is to keep the enemy in lane and stop their backs as much as possible. With this, you're shackling the enemy to your lane. Keep in mind, their resources are lower than yours and they weren't able to spend their gold yet. That automatically means that you're stronger and should be way more aggressive. They should not be allowed to get any last hits for free, and if you really want to be toxic, you can actually zone them off entirely from the wave depending on what champion you are and what your support's playing. Additionally, you might find yourself with an opportunity to roam to another lane close by, simply for the fact that you have some spare time until the enemy's done pushing the wave back into you. You can catch your opponents off guard with that and transition your personal lead into a lead for your team, especially if you link up with your jungler. Now let's move on to the most vital part of being an AD carry, the team fighting. Many players are afraid to teamfight, and I can kinda understand why that comes to be. Teamfights are a collection of multiple events happening simultaneously. There's a lot of things to look out for. Or is there? If you look at a teamfight objectively, yeah, there's tons of information that needs to be processed, and it almost looks like an inhumane amount of things that you have to consider. But now I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Before you even go into a team fight, you can actually assign priority to certain bits of information. So why would you do that? Well, it's kind of simple, to make it easier to acquire and process the important pieces of the teamfight puzzle. Not every champion is a threat to you, and so it's irrelevant what they're doing or where they are in the first place. To give you a very easy example, Blitzcrank is not really a champion that's considered good, and that's for a good reason. He only has one move, and that's hooking somebody in. This skill shot is long range, but flies pretty slowly. And if they whiff that skill, that's kind of all the agency that champion has in a team fight, because other than that, he can't really do much that's dangerous to you. Now with that in mind, you need to start categorizing champions into dangerous and weak champs. And for that, you ought to check the scoreboard and see how strong they are in the current state of the game. More so, you need to understand what makes a champion strong or temporarily weak. Reassess your perception. Think about the enemy's abilities and use the way that they work to your advantage. I mean, think about it this way. So Blitzcrank's hook is a threat, but if it's on cooldown, it no longer is. Also, if you have somebody in front of you that blocks the hook, you're able to deal a ton of damage for free. But before you get to that point, break down the enemy champions and plan ahead so that you're not overwhelmed in a fight and processing all the information right then. Combining all the precious principles, we've already reached a thorough understanding of the AD carry role, but we do need to add more to become the very best of the best. So this next part is about knowing the limits of your champion and the maximum amount of damage that you can deal. To improve yourself in that department, it's key to narrow down your champion pool to at most 3 champions in that role. For AD carry, I just stick with the heavy meta champions as they're just straight up better and way more forgiving than the others. That doesn't mean that you can't play the characters that you find the most fun, but if you choose to do so, you'll most likely have a harder time than if you just pick meta. Putting in the practice is important, but more than that is actually believing in your own ability to make plays. Rather than sitting back in an idle position, you want to push forward and test your limits as a player and champion alike. Find out what makes you great as a player and what personal strengths you can harbor. As you're pressing forward, you will suffer some temporary setbacks, and that's completely normal. Do not let that discourage you from improving. Keep on trying and you'll grow as a player guaranteed. And by having this kind of mindset, you'll also spot many more mistakes that the enemy's making, and you'll have the tools ready to punish them at any time, rather than being solely dependent on your team's merits. Think outside the box as an AD carry and be creative. So now that we have a lot of broad strokes for what an AD carry is and how they can play, let's go over their early, mid, and late game. For the early stages, our primary focus is on getting as much gold as possible. Get as many last hits as you can and check what items you need to build. Depending on what champion you're playing, you need more or less items to hit critical mass in terms of scaling. Especially adjusting your build to the current needs of the game is a quality that you need to understand. For example, going back for the first time and buying yourself a BF sword compared to buying yourself an Executioner's Calling and a longsword. Both purchases are 1500 gold, but both carry very different values. By buying the BF sword, you're getting 8 more AD, but you're missing out on the healing reduction. Depending on the situation, what builds you're generally going for, and what champions you're facing, buying one or the other will make the difference in a fight. But essentially, AD carries are usually weakest in the early game, so just focus on scaling, getting as much gold as you can from minions, and getting to your item breakpoints. In the mid game, you want to start focusing objectives, such as epic monsters and turrets. If you win lane and take the tower early, you can try and rotate around the map to take the other available outer turrets. For that, you ideally swap with the respective laners and put them to where you were before. The key part here is to not over-rotate when there's still neutral objectives on the table. Moving away from a freshly spawned dragon that we can contest because we're stronger is not a great move. However, moving away to take something in return for losing the dragon when you're weaker is a good and solid trade. It shows that you're aware of your team's relative strength and headstrong enough to make the conscious call to give up on the dragon for the sake of scaling. Just losing one dragon, or 2, or even 3 will not lose you the game by default. The only really important dragon that can be considered absolutely broken is the Elder Dragon, and that one you're gonna need to contest. But that's in the endgame, so let's talk about that. In the endgame, AD carries need to stick with somebody that can protect them unless they've got no reason to fear anyone. Now is your time as an AD carry to display your skills and all the previous work that you did up to this point. You've scaled, you farmed, and now it's up to you to carry your team to victory. Getting caught off guard would instantly end this home run and leave you behind with a bitter taste in your mouth, so make sure that you have the most suitable enchant for the champions that you're facing and do not walk into Fog of War. You have to be passive as long as you don't have all the information that you need. Oh, and remember that team fighting part? Assign priorities, think about the threats, and also think of a plan of what needs to happen for you to carry. But the neat thing is that you should be doing this throughout the early and the mid game as well, because you can tell who's getting fed on the enemy team and who's weak. AD carry is one of the most interesting positions because it feels like you have the least agency early in the game, but as the game goes longer and longer, you start dishing out insane amounts of damage. So use the early and mid game to think and strategize, kinda like your support should be doing with you. At least once you get comfortable CSing enough. That comes first. And with that said, we're at the end of today's video. Thanks all so much for watching. If you like the content, remember to leave a like and sub to the channel. It really helps us grow and keep bringing you more content. Anyway, that's it for it today. So best of luck on the Rift, everybody. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next one.